today with a special guest, Mr. Chris Legg. Chris, thanks for coming in. It's good to see you.
Hey, it's it's wonderful being back on campus. Not, no, just kidding. No,
Well,
I love my time at Gilman, and it's great always coming back.
I saw you at the Starbucks a couple days ago, and it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a couple years, and I'm interested in catching up a little bit about what you're doing in retirement and some of the books that you're reading and the projects you're working on.
Okay, well, you know, teaching is such a full life. And when all of a sudden the checks are no longer coming, but more importantly, you don't have to be anywhere, it's a real shock. Uh, you know, uh, and frankly, I found the transition a little difficult at first because, you know, while there were tons of things to do at home, I've got a nice property, a couple of acres, uh, always things to do. I never wanted to do them.
hmm Well,
Uh,
I think that's pretty common in retirement is you see people go into retirement and then immediately, like a year later, come out of retirement and, start teaching or doing whatever it was that they were doing beforehand again because it's a shock. You have all this time, it seems like.
that or they frankly they die. uh, but so it's been a transition. Uh, but I'm now curiously at a place where I have more things to do than time to do it,
Hmm.
uh, and uh, and that's frankly a joy.
So how are you spending your time, in retirement? I see a stack of books that you've brought in. I really want to talk about the Washington biography, which I'm teaching U.S. history one section this year, and I've looked through that book a little bit, and, it's a massive book. Ron Chernow, and he's written a ton of presidential
Yeah.
biographies, including Grant, the most recent one, I think Ulysses Grant, which we're getting towards the Civil War in my class, so I'm going to be picking up that book too. But what are you reading right now? And tell us a little bit about the Washington book.
Okay. Well, let's start off with the Washington book. Um, what was this country like, uh, really, when the Indians were here and the colonists were first arriving? It's uh, it's a topic that, for some reason or other, fascinates me. Um, and there's a line in this biography, something to the effect that uh, Washington didn't didn't go to college. He went to war,
hmm
um, and as a it's really quite unbelievable when looking at his speeches and various things to think that he had really nothing more than a grade school education. Uh, but the setting for particularly his some of his early experiences. For example, one of his early missions was to go deliver a letter to the French commander at Fort Duquesne. Um, and he went there during winter, uh, crossing over the mountains, fording streams. Um, uh, he had some, unbelievable experiences with Indians, and of course with the French. Um, so we're so fortunate that there are so many great biographers who are practicing their art these days. Ron Chernow is one of them, but I've actually read um, three biographies of Washington.
Oh, wow.
Um, and the biographers, all of them are really excellent, and they have slightly, sort of different interests and different skills. Chernow is remarkable for his ability to use fiction techniques, a la the new journalists,
Hmm.
to create a sense of setting, to create suspense. And anyway, it's a magnificent book, uh, and
Well,
I've loved, uh, getting to understand Washington a little bit more, and frankly, it's opened up some trips for me. I want to go to Valley Forge. I want to go to Yorktown.
mhm.
Uh, uh, I want to go to, and I have a nephew uh, who's in Pittsburgh right now. I want to go to Fort Duquesne. Uh, uh, so those are things that I want to do, but I don't feel like I have really all that much time to do them.
Well,
Uh,
Valley Forge is pretty easy. I was actually there this past weekend. I grew up right down the street from Valley Forge. My sister got married there. It's got a great hiking and walking trail, and they actually have a new visitor center for Valley Forge, and you
yeah.
can learn a little bit about the winter they spent there in Washington, and it's just amazing stuff. So that's an easy trip. It's only a couple hours. It's a day trip.
Well, I just have to get off my duff and go there. Uh, so anyway, so reading has become a lot of fun. Um, I actually have a routine. I go to my office, which is the Starbucks in Mount Washington, which is a beautiful Starbucks because it's is a converted, fairly old brick building,
Hmm.
uh, and it's got a nice space to it. And I feel like I'm sort of slowly getting, to know some of the people who go there regularly. I
Yeah.
mean, very, very slowly, and I don't want to do it quickly or anyway. I don't want any deep relationships or anything like that. But it's kind of fun going to a place and feeling a little bit like it's your office.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Um,
And it was really fun seeing you there the other day.
yeah,
Uh,
it's a good run-in. I
uh,
go there a fair bit. I think of Starbucks when I'm not at Gilman and not in the Gilman Library or my office or the studio here as sort
you
of
mean there are
office.
times when you really want to get away from Gilman?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
And
okay.
Starbucks is just a good place because, I like seeing people there, but sometimes you can just post up and nobody really bothers you and you've got your
Yeah.
coffee and they play the light music in the background and it's a good.
And you might even convince yourself to grade a few compositions, you
Right,
know?
right. It's a good, relaxing and focused place.
Yeah.
So back to Washington, what about him as a leader, as a person, fascinates you so much? So I'm teaching this U.S. history class, but I'm also teaching a leadership and character class for seniors and elective. And I think Washington's a really interesting study as a leader because he seems like he was a born leader. He was made for, you know, inspiring and leading people. Not only because he was a big guy, he was 6'3",
Hmm.
6'4".
Hmm.
I think height helps a little bit, but he was also just, I haven't read anything written about Washington that from people during this time that you know everyone really revered him and loved him and followed him in a natural sort of way.
Uh, I'm not so sure if that's actually true. He had a number of rivals. He didn't have a great relationship, say, with Jefferson. Uh, One of Washington's great strengths was he realized his limitations, or the things that he wasn't nearly as good at as other people.
Hmm.
Uh, and there was no hesitation, I think, to turn to them. Um, so I liked that sort of honest appraisal of oneself. Um, the second thing he had was he had a presence. Um, and I mean, this is going to sound a little corny, but probably the greatest man I've come across was Mr. Finney.
Hmm.
And he had a presence. Uh, I mean, the last thing you wanted to do would be to disappoint him. Uh, and there was this amazing, I don't know, vibe to Mr. Finney. And Washington, as a young man, I think was quite ambitious and quite self-focused. He wanted to own great stretches of land. He wanted to be an aristocrat. He was from a second-tier family in Virginia, second or third tier family in Virginia. Anyway, his great ability was basically to stay in the game in the Revolutionary War. He wasn't, I don't think he's been admired by military historians as a great general from the standpoint of strategy, movement of troops. But he kept the army together, and he realized at a certain point that his greatest success is going to be simply not being defeated. And he did, and he was willing at times when he knew just for the sake of morale he had to do things. He was willing to take considerable gambles, such as the crossing the Delaware, and that particular, Trenton, Princeton battles.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Fort Duquesne, because I taught a little bit about the French and Indian War and Washington's blunders. He was not very successful in the French and Indian War. He was kind of looked upon as a fool in some instances, but he had this mindset that he almost wanted to redeem himself during the American Revolution and rise above the errors he made during the precursor, the French and Indian War.
It's funny. I have a good friend who, I basically shamed him into finishing the Chernow biography. He got about, I think he got about 35 pages, and I kept sending him emails. Bart, how far are you? And look, you got to. He finally did finish the book, and then I said, "Well, wasn't the whole incident with Braddock an amazing chapter in Washington's life?" And Bart, Harvard grad, Bart, who's a brilliant guy, he couldn't particularly remember it at all. But I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. The Braddock defeat. Well, one thing that was interesting was that Washington had no formal training. He did not go to a military school, and I think he picked up things from various people, but also where he could from books. And his opportunity to go to war with Braddock was an opportunity for him to really learn about being a general, about being a commander. And he fairly early in life realized or thought, this is what I want to do. And Braddock was faced with an almost impossible job, but he's sort of trained in European techniques, and he realized the hazards of basically going to Pittsburgh, and he did it very slowly and methodically. Basically built a road in stretches, built a road there, but he was ambushed in a place where his troops were confined to a narrow corridor, and the Indians and the French were impossible to see because they were behind things to shelter them. Uh, but anyway, I've forgotten my point here exactly, but uh, Washington, with this incredible presence, um, his ability to uh, recognize his own strengths and weaknesses, um, and then a fair amount of luck, because uh, he came back from a number of battles with bullet holes you know, uh, in his clothing,
Hmm.
uh, and he was not shy about exposing himself in the action of rallying his troops. Uh, so anyway, there was a lot about Washington that I really liked, including uh, including a little romance. Uh, you might remember that his first love uh, was the wife of another man, and
Right. Yeah.
yeah, and they corresponded, and some of the letters almost seem like they're written in code. Uh, uh,
I think those are the best part of some of these biographies, the little side tangents, I guess you could say, or chapters into the personal lives of the figure that make them more human. Not only are you learning about Washington as this great general and, leader and I would say natural born leader and, respected founding father, but you're also seeing the human side of him. And, I think the same can be said with Hamilton. I've got Hamilton's biography, and you
yeah,
learn a little bit about his affair and
yeah,
his marriage and sort of the I don't think you could say gossip, but the personal life that is,
yeah.
happening at the same time that these people are doing great things for the future of the country.
So anyway, it's a lot of fun reading, and so that's a big part of kind of my retirement life. I always try to throw in a little work on the grounds at home. Uh, so I've been raking. I mean, I'm not going to use a blower. Uh, we're in an energy crisis. So I'm using a rake
Hmm.
and an old sail. I was quite a dedicated sailor.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, earlier in my life before that avenue kind of got shut off. Uh,
How'd you get into sailing?
uh, I learned how to sail first at a summer camp in New Hampshire, uh, and then I was very fortunate that the woman I married, uh, her grandfather had gone up to a lake in Ontario and had bought a log cabin from a farmer. It's an absolutely beautiful lake. Uh, and boy, was I surprised to find a bunch of Baltimoreans on this lake. After we were married, and I went up there for the first time with her. Uh, but anyway, uh, so I get we took our kids up for about 6 weeks in the summer, and one of the things that went on up there was sunfish racing. And when there was races twice a week, and it became a big thing. I just loved. And when I came back, uh, I just realized I've got to sail in Maryland. Uh, and I went down to Annapolis, joined a small boat club called Severn Sailing Association. I'm sure some of the Gilman students and quite a few grads are familiar with that. It's a top small boat sailing uh, club, and so at a certain point, I was traveling all over. Uh, to sail. I've sailed in Florida. I've sailed up in Canada, New England, and it was basically putting a laser, which is a single-handed boat. It's basically the length of a sunfish, but has a much more sophisticated rig, but it's relatively simple. Uh, anyway, it was something I really, really loved doing.
Now, are you originally from this area? Did you grow up here, or where are you from?
Uh, I'm born in Baltimore, um, and went to Gilman.
Did you really?
Yeah, and then uh, after college, I decided that I wanted to go into journalism, uh, and somehow or other I connected with a former Sun Papers reporter who had started some weeklies in Vermont, and I worked as a journalist in Vermont, uh, and then later for the Memphis Commercial Appeal, which is the morning newspaper in Memphis. Uh, and then I went and worked in Washington, uh, uh, following legislation in sort of the newsletter world, which is a really, really soul-sucking world because it's just details, not very, anyway, wasn't a whole lot of fun. Uh, and then I transitioned into teaching at Gilman.
So, as a journalist, let me ask you, because I know that you have this book on the New York Times that you brought in.
Yes.
How do you, I guess, make sense of journalism today and news today? Because I took a class in college during the 2016 election about bias in news, and it was with this woman who I'm sure is in this book, Jill Abramson,
Uh-huh.
and I was lucky to be in this very small class of people and taking this class during an election year where we just talked about different news sources and the subtle biases or the not so subtle biases that impact your understanding of current events and what's going on in the world. So, as someone who is in that industry and who's reading this book on the New York Times, like how do you parse through the news and get through the bias and try to figure out what is true that's happening in the United States and the world?
Well, there is going to be, it's impossible probably to run a totally straight line through an event. But I didn't really have any trouble attempting to do it and trying to be as objective as possible in my days. You know, you always go to both sides. When I was following legislation in Washington for a House Senate caucus, it was called the Environmental Study Conference, and we were funded by Republicans and Democrats. So it was a bipartisan caucus when they contributed their staff money to basically hire a reporting service which would tell you about environmental legislation. People who read this were primarily staffers and advisors for the senators and representatives. And so they would find out that, say, for instance, on a particular a piece of energy legislation, that the environmentalists favored, this amendment. It was opposed by the industry, maybe by the power industry. So, you attempt to find people on both sides of an issue. You attempt as best as possible to try to understand it. I think that, inevitably bias does creep in, but good reporters are constantly trying to be as objective as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I loved a book called The Kingdom and the Power by Gay Talese, which goes, have you ever read that?
I have not, no.
It's an absolutely wonderful book. And this book right here is this book right here is an attempt to bring the kingdom and the power up to date. And it sort of describes, the top editors and their routes to their position, the publisher, and the interactions, and anyway, they're just very strong, very interesting personalities, and I think it's fascinating to see. But I think that I can't understand. I have an older brother who's actually two older brothers who have done quite well for themselves, and they think the New York Times is completely biased. The only thing they'd possibly want to look at is the Wall Street Journal, and I just can't relate to it. I don't understand it.
Hmm.
I love the New York Times.
Interesting. So this book is kind of a history of the New York Times and an update on that Gay Talese book you mentioned.
If you want to read and back in 1982, when I came to Gilman, Mr. Finney had set up a day for me to observe various teachers. And one of the courses that I sat in with was the government course, taught by the great Gilman teacher whose name is just blanked out of my head. But who is he? He's retired.
Government teacher.
Yes, he taught government. Was I remember, bringing him down when I was sort of coordinating assemblies in the middle school. I had to get him to come down and give an assembly. Anyway, I was sitting in on that class, and the book that was being discussed was a book about the coverage of the presidential race,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just fascinating little vignettes about the different reporters and their styles. And the guy's name was Timothy Krause, the writer of the book. Come on, what's the name of that book?
So I'm interested
Yeah.
in your time at Gilman when you were a student here, and
Yeah.
kind of what are some of your fondest memories being here, as a teenager, as a high school student. I don't know when you came in as a student at Gilman, but what were those years like for you, when you were here, not as a teacher, but as a student?
Well, I came in as a seventh grader. I had gone to Calvert, and Gilman had some, just some wonderful people who were there. And one of the things that I am proudest of is that in my post-Gilman years, I kept up with Mr. Russell, Edward Russell, and he was the guy who founded Gilman Wrestling, and taught at Gilman for some incredible number of years. Was just a lovely person, and one of sort of the kindest, friendliest. I don't know, there was a presence about him. And so anyway, I would come back into town. Maybe I was living in Memphis, Tennessee at the time. I'd come back into town, and what would I do? I would call up Mr. Russell, and we would go have lunch together. And I remember going down to Thompson's right down here at Cold Spring and York, and Mr. Russell and I were, it was a luncheon. Uh, would you like anything to drink? Mr. Russell said, yes, I'll take a double vodka and another one in about 10 minutes.
So he was your coach, or was he?
He was my coach was I had two varsity coaches, Mr. Marshall and Mr. Brown. Edward Brown was my coach my junior and senior year, and Mr. Russell was sort of a deep assistant, and he was well advanced in his years, and we used to. I used to laugh with some of my wrestling friends because Mr. Russell would, Chris, let me show you a move, and he'd take off his glasses and he'd put it down to the side, and then he'd get down onto the mat, which would take 20 seconds or so, and then he would say, okay, get on top in referee's position, and you get in top in referee's position, trying desperately not to put any weight on him. But anyway, he was just a wonderful, lovely person. And let's see, Mr. Finney was assisting during some of those years. And actually, to change the topic slightly, here's one of my favorite memories of Mr. Finney. Mr. Finney, and I'm the varsity wrestling coach, and Mr. Finney is now he's taken off his gray suit, which he wore every day, right? And he's put on khakis, and he's put on, some sort of flannel shirt. And he's gone over to the wrestling room, and he's just sitting against the wall. And it's time in that practice for live wrestling. I say, pair up, let's go. Mr. Finney, Ty, this was Ty House, our heavyweight. Ty doesn't have a partner. And he goes, oh. He takes off his glasses. And he gets on Ty. And believe me, Ty had new respect for the switch, which was one of Mr. Finney's moves. That's one of my favorite stories.
Love it. So did you play other sports when you played lacrosse maybe? Or just wrestling?
Well, believe it or not, here I'm going to brag. I was the co-captain of the football team, captain of the wrestling team, and co-captain of the lacrosse team. And I played left guard and linebacker, both ways on the football team, and that was the most amazing experience. Was playing on Mr. Finney's team. It was his next to last year as the varsity football coach. And there was no person who was sort of more all in than Mr. Finney. The games would be filmed, and on Monday you would get in your mailbox, you'd get a thick sheaf of papers with a play-by-play description, and you would get a grade based on how you performed, So it might have been a waggle. Sherm Bristow was the quarterback, and it was Legg, you missed your block. But anyway, Mr. Russell, Mr. Finney, and these are names that you've heard before. Nick Schloter was an unforgettable and terrific teacher uh, and presence. Jerry Downs. Um, uh, I wish had gotten Mr. Barker, uh, um, who was the head of the English department. Uh, but I love Mr. Baldwin,
So when
who was the headmaster uh, uh, in my, I guess, junior and senior years, maybe sophomore too. It went, Mr. Callard was headmaster my first, I guess, 2 years. And then Mr. Baldwin came in, and I think he was always seen as a sort of transition headmaster. And then 2 years after I graduated, Mr. Finney became the headmaster.
when you left Gilman, went into journalism, what made it appealing for you to want to come back to Gilman as a teacher? What was that decision like?
Well, I had journalism wasn't really a very good career for me. I got into it because I had a great experience writing my senior paper in college, and just I just took off on it, and got did well, got an A+ on it, and the teacher wrote best one I've read so far.
Wow. Do you remember what it was on?
Yes, it was on the novels of Robert Penn Warren, and so anyway, based on that, I decided to try writing, and my problem was I was not fast at absorbing information, and I was not fast at spitting it back out, and so I persisted, worked hard at it, and developed my skills. And in retrospect, it was the best thing for me to do, because I became a student of writing during those years. You would see what your editor, I had a terrific editor for the Memphis newspaper, and you would see what he would do with your copy. Anyway, it was a frustrating experience, and so I found myself in my mid-30s, working down in Washington, not enjoying it, and I decided, I thought, what am I going to transition to? And I ended up by deciding on teaching, and so there was a service from my college, the college I went to, where they would send out your resume and a cover letter to colleges. I mean, to wherever you wanted to apply, and so anyway, so I wanted to teach. It was going to have to be private school because I didn't have an education degree, and I applied to schools all up and down the East Coast, and actually all across the country. Now that I think about it, and since I'd had a very close relationship with Mr. Finney, he immediately basically offered me a job.
Awesome. So back to the Robert Penn Warren. I haven't read any Robert Penn Warren. What made you want to write your senior thesis on his books? Is it All the President's Men? Is that Robert Penn Warren?
Yes. Yeah. Uh, well, that is a. Have you ever read that book?
No.
It's a fabulous book.
I know there's a movie too.
Yeah. Uh, Robert Penn Warren was most famous for his poetry. Uh, but anyway, I was an American Studies major, uh, and uh, I loved All the King's Men, and I don't know, I don't know exactly what the initial impetus was, because I hadn't read many of his books. Uh, Many of the other ones aren't particularly famous. Uh,
Hmm.
One's called Knight Rider. Uh, um, 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 Knight Rider. Well, my memory is failing me here. It's been quite a few years, but they, I detected a pattern. Okay, so the main character always was started out as a bit of an idealist, uh, and then as he became more sophisticated and more observant of the adult world, he saw uh, these cracks in it. He saw the hypocrisy of various people. Um, and you know, then, as he becomes disillusioned, um, cynical, but somehow or other, he doesn't give up, and he's still committed to honestly looking at the world. He sort of detects the humanity and uh, the courage, and I don't know, forgives. There's an element of forgiveness as well, and he is able to, I don't know, piece back the world and see it in a positive light, and to see people in a positive light, um, and that was the process that was that sort of got played out in almost all of his books. So that was the idea.
Another book recommendation right there. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for coming in and talking a little bit today. Today's episode's a little bit shorter, I guess, because we've got class today. It's a Wednesday, so classes are a little bit shorter, but
Hey, you know something? You need to do a little teaching.
I need to do little teaching, right? It's not all
Yeah.
fun and games.
Yeah. And yeah, and I'm amazed that you had the time to, sit and chat. Uh, anyway, it's been a lot of fun being here.
Well, we'll
Uh,
we'll see you next time in your office at Starbucks, reading books, writing, making the world a better place. So thank you very much for your time. It's been
okay,
fun.
and thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too.